Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the continuation of Schrödinger's cat. This will be part 4, chapter 4, entitled The Box is Open. Quote, "There are wounds that never show on the body that are deeper and more hurtful than anything that bleeds." Laurel K. Hamilton, Mistral's Kiss. Years later, Aizawa would still not be sure how Izuku got to that place in the state that he was in. According to the tracks they followed to find him, he took the train and probably still walked a long time until he reached his destination. Luckily for them, a child walking alone drew attention. With Ragdoll's help, they were able to find him that very day. All Might found him first, and soon Aizawa was there. He glanced at the #1 hero standing at the edge of the clearing, unmoving and showing the most serious face he'd ever seen on him since the USJ. Izuku was curled up in a little ball, sitting on a tree trunk and hugging his knees tightly. Around the clearing, some rocks and logs floated smoothly. Even from all the way there, Aizawa could still hear his muffled sobs, and all he wanted to do was go there, shake him for escaping the hospital, but most of all check out if he was hurt. "Is he alone?" Ragdoll looked around, her face turned slightly as her eyes went down. "There is an empty underground space with an entrance to the surface. It's a hiding place occupying much of the clearing." She paused and frowned. "There's no one alive, but—" She stopped and looked at him meaningfully. They had probably found where he was at the time that he was missing then. It was the same forest that he had woken up in, where they looked for clues without finding anything. If only someone had brought Ragdoll from the start. With the sound of footsteps, he looked back and saw an Almasa, with a few more cops that were helping with the search. Aizawa rubbed a hand over his eyes and entered the clearing, the others falling behind. Even if he hadn't raised his head, he knew Izuku had noticed him. His quirk never let out a heat source nearby. When he got close enough, he saw that near the trunk where he stood was an entrance, one hidden by a carpet of leaves and grass, a wooden door rotted by rain and weather. He looked at the two heroes and pointed to the door. Aizawa knelt in front of the curled-up child, noting the tremors that passed through his body. Now Masa, who was heading for the door, looked at him, and threw a coat. He laid the warm fabric on Izuku, rubbing his arms and sitting beside him on the trunk, waiting. Some men came in through the door, and even from there he could smell a strong odor. He felt a cold hand and looked down, seeing Izuku's profile staring at his feet. The boy leaned against his side, and Aizawa wrapped his arms around him, resting his head on the white hair, Izuku's cold face pressed against his chest. "Izuku, talk to me, please." He heard him let out a air softly before his voice, small and shaking, could be heard. "He had a mind-controlling quirk. It worked only with suggestions. He thought it worked for everyone, but I realized that it depended on how stubborn the person was. You could fight it off eventually." Aizawa squeezed him a little more and looked over his head at Naomasa. That was the intent of their conversation. "That's how he got the other boys. He could spend weeks watching them, analyzing them. He said what they wanted to hear and made him like him. No one was going to miss them, but I had my mom. It was a risk, but he really wanted me. I think the game was getting boring for him. He said—" Izuku paused, his voice now a disinterested tone that reminded him too much of when he began living with Aizawa, that terrible apathy that had completely disappeared in recent months. "He stopped me at the corner of my house and came to talk to me. I woke up down here. After I learned that he had spoken to my mom, he tried to make her forget about me with his quirk, but it didn't work. He thought it would be easy. He said that no one wanted a quirkless child, that she was just going to need an excuse." Aizawa closed his eyes tightly, trying to control himself. "He was wrong. Your mother made hell on earth for you, Izuku." "I know it. He said I was more work than I was worth. I was drawing a lot of attention. Hiding the evidence was ideal, but he didn't want to give up. He liked the game too much. I was a challenge. Even so, having to force me to do things made him eventually angry. He wanted me to obey, but his quirk didn't work right on me. I could break the effect very fast. I was too stubborn." Of course he was. Aizawa didn't know any more stubborn person than Izuku. He was a survivor. Stubbornness for a long time was the only weapon he had. "He always came at night. The monsters appear at night, Eraserhead," he had once said. "There was no way out. The door never opened. I almost got out once, but then—" Izuku opened his hands in his lap, the fingers shaking. Unfortunately, Aizawa understood immediately. The bastard had done it with the kids. Aizawa's kid. Hands for trying to escape. He was putting him in conditioning with the damn quirk, but Izuku broke the control, and so he resorted to it. And knowing how stubborn and clever Izuku was, he didn't even want to think about what else had happened. He brought my mom with him one night. Aizawa heard the sounds of trees falling around, but he kept his eyes on the boy beside him, hugging him closer. Even now it was hard to get his quirk off, to press the broken switch that always seemed to want to go back in place. Izuku. It was as if he didn't hear him anymore, his voice faster and faster to the point that he could barely understand what he was saying now. He always said that if I tried something, he would go after her. That way he could make me do whatever he wanted easier, convince me not to try to run away. If I did something wrong, she would pay. I think Mom tricked him, made it easy for him to bring her on purpose to find me. Aizawa could see it clearly, only from the little he knew of Inka Midoriya, though, through Naomasa. After all the things that woman had done to find her son, she could easily do something crazy like this. She wouldn't miss a chance to find him. He thought his quirk had worked on her, but the moment that she saw me, she attacked him. It all happened so fast. She just wanted to stop him from getting close to me, but he was so big and so full of anger. I couldn't do anything to help, and Mom... He was going to kill Mom, I remember feeling something snap. He pointed to his own chest. On here, something expanded, and I couldn't breathe. Everything went white. He screamed and screamed, and the sound of things breaking and cracking and snapping. I didn't realize right away what had happened, that it was my quirk. I just wanted him to stop hurting my mom. A log exploded in the clearing, splinters going in various directions. He activated his quirk, and his scarf surrounded them like a shield. With Izuku's quirk off, stones and logs fell to the ground. His body softened beside Aizawa, exhausted. Izuku, you defended her. Your quirk defended both of you. He saw him flinch and realized that the worst was yet to come. Izuku's body trembled even more. The moment that he blinked, he saw the ground begin to crack around them and activated his quirk immediately. His eyes were burning in the process. They couldn't risk a suppressant with the dose he'd taken at the hospital. I think I blacked out for a long time, maybe even more than a day. He saw him cover his face with his hands. His voice was muffled and shaking. When I woke up, I saw him on the floor, bent and broken like a cockroach, smashed against the wall. There was so much blood, and Mom? My mom was near the door. I called and called for her, but she wouldn't answer me. She wouldn't move. She wasn't breathing. Her eyes were open, but she couldn't see me in her neck. And I got it. She was too close to me at the time, trying to reach to me, to help me. He heard Naomasa curse slowly, where he was getting the same conclusion as him. Oh, Izuku. Aizawa couldn't take it any more, and he blinked his eyes. He heard some voices exclaim in fright as the door was torn open and thrown away into the clearing, slamming into the tree trunks, twisting and tearing in the air. When the last piece fell, Izuku's quirk finally calmed down, becoming placid. The sudden silence was almost deafening. Now he understood why he hated his quirk so much, why he hated himself so much. He understood why he pushed it so much into his own mind. When he spoke again, his voice was broken, his hands gripping his own hair in despair. I killed my mom with my quirk. Who killed Schrödinger's cat? It was you who opened the box. Aizawa removed the child's hands from his hair with difficulty, gripping thin wrists before Izuku could hurt himself any more. With one free hand he pulled his face up gently and met his eyes with conviction. You didn't want to do that. Nothing was in your control. It wasn't your fault. Izuku, it was an accident. The boy shook his head in denial and collapsed into sobs, a cry that was too painful to hear. It was an accident, Izuku. Are you listening to me? It was an accident. Aizawa pressed his face into white hair and swayed him soothingly for a long time, repeating it until he felt Izuku's breath become more even. The exhaustion of the last few days had finally reached the boy, and his body melted in the hug as he reached unconsciousness. Naomasa approached. His expression was somber. Inko? We found her. We found them both. Aizawa bit his lip, trying to control the turmoil he felt at the moment. His voice left with an accusatory tone. You don't look surprised. The man sighed and sat beside him on the trunk. He ignored how exhausted he looked. About his quirk? Yes, I am surprised. About the mother being alive? Not so much. Namasa looked into the hiding place where more of his men had entered. When I caught this case, Inka Midoriya made an impression on me, even in the short time I was with her. If this woman were alive, there was nothing in the world that would prevent her from being with her son. To someone who looked so peaceful, she was a force of nature, so yes, I knew she wasn't alive. Yagi was also of the same impression as me. He knew her well enough during this period. He spoke with an old acquaintance to confirm her condition, since Yagi and Inko had some sort of connection. He convinced him to look into his future and to find if they would meet again. Night-Eye. He kept that fact for later, hugging Izuku close. Why didn't you say anything? Aizawa, do you think in the state this child was in when he arrived that he would have accepted it? Deep down he knew the truth too, but he couldn't accept it. There was a reason for him to just remember it now. When he is no longer able to bear the impact, he is a bright kid. He felt the anger go away and deflated in exhaustion. That's why you didn't force him to remember. You were giving him time. The man sighed and he nodded, reluctantly touching his shoulder. They both looked at the boy. Aizawa noticed that only in those 2 days did he look much thinner. A whole day without eating, with a quirk like his, was dangerous. You can take him home. We'll take care of everything else. All Might approached the two of them, looking out of place in his colorful clothes at the terrible scene. I'll escort you. Aizawa refused to give Izuku to All Might. He wanted to keep him as close as possible. The hero had been silent. Aizawa didn't know exactly what his involvement was in the case, and was curious to find out, especially with the new information he had on Inko Midoriya. From the beginning, the hero seemed too invested in the situation, beyond what was professional, and Aizawa noticed the way he looked at Izuku and Yue. Yagi-san. The quiet voice made them both look at Izuku. His half-lidded eyes were staring at All Might. Aizawa's eyes widened, but All Might didn't seem surprised that the boy knew his real identity. Hello, young Midoriya. Hi. Aizawa smiled slightly when he heard his shy voice. The kid was really a fanboy. You found me. All Might looked sad. A little too late, but yes, I'm sorry, my boy. The child didn't answer, leaning his face against Aizawa's chest. Aizawa looked at All Might in question. That day earlier, young Midoriya and I had a terrible encounter, twice. He eventually discovered my secret, and I said something that was far from the truth for him. But when I went to try and remedy my mistake, I didn't find him any more. The man clenched his fist. His expression was haunted. If only I had gotten rid of the reporters sooner. It's not your fault. Izuku's voice was tired, and they both looked down again as his eyes were closed. All Might and Bakugo are stupid. All Might chuckled in surprise. Aizawa knew that, being fully aware Izuku wouldn't say that, but he was too polite to do so. He frowned in curiosity. What did you tell him? All Might looked down with embarrassment. His expression was tormented. Something that was not my right and far from the truth. Young Midoriya. Yes? You can be a hero. Izuku tensed in his arms and opened his eyes. I cannot. Of course you can. He shook his head, eyes unfocused, face contorted in sadness, and Aizawa squeezed him a little tighter. I'm a villain. He said it with such conviction, as if it were the absolute truth, something too obvious that they must already know. Aizawa would refute immediately, but All Might stepped in before he could. This isn't true. Who told you this nonsense? I killed my mother. All Might looked at him in surprise. Aizawa sighed, knowing that he would have to repeat this a lot for his problem child. Izuku, it was an accident. Your quirk tried to save you and protect you. If not for that, you would both be dead. So no, you are not a villain. I won't let you blame yourself for surviving. As Eraserhead said, All Might pointed at him and rolled his eyes. Izuku continued to stare at him with quivering lips. Heroes, young Midoriya, are humans too. They bleed. They make mistakes and difficult decisions. You may not officially want to become a hero, and that's fine. You can be anything that you want to be, but in my eyes, and I know that in Eraserhead's eyes here, young Ida, and Todoroki, you are already a hero. You have no idea how much you've inspired me to be a better person. You are my hero, young Midoriya. Huh, you can make a good speech. He looked at the other appreciatively. All Might coughed in embarrassment, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. Anyways, there's something characteristic of every hero, young Midoriya. Do you know what that is? Izuku denied, his eyes adorably wide throughout the hero's impassioned speech. "Getting in trouble for problems that don't concern them. And from what I've heard about you, it's something you do quite often." "Too often," Aizawa grunted. Izuku didn't answer that. He just leaned his head back against his guardian's chest and closed his eyes. Aizawa sighed and looked at the other hero. "Thank you for that." All Might smiled, his face embarrassed. "My pleasure." Even with his body in an advanced state of decomposition, it was not difficult to find his identity, but digging into its history was far from easy. For someone with so much offense, his record was clean, probably the result of a quirk that let him get rid of his crimes. He lived in a good neighborhood, was well recognized in the community, paid his fees, and had the same work in the library for the last 20 years. A perfect citizen during the day, a pedophile, rapist, kidnapper, and killer at night. In addition to the 9 victims, including Izuku, more crimes had been attributed to him over the years now that they have discovered the true pattern. The things they'd found on his hard drive would give nightmares for years, and Aizawa was glad for not being the one responsible for having to check it all out. As he passed through the hideout, watching the horrible photos and videos of his boy, finding the dirty bed and the bookcase, and he thought about the hell that Izuku had lived there, in a prison disguised as a home, made just for him as he was watched for weeks on the streets by a monster that was lurking without anyone noticing. It was there that someone had almost completely broke one of the brightest people he had ever met. If not for Inka Midoriya, no one would ever have gone after Izuku. He would just be someone who disappeared and would never be found, dead when a monster got tired of him, making room for one more victim. Aizawa didn't like to think about that, to think that he would never have met Izuku, seen him with Moki and his colored lamps, hiding in his sleeping bag, laughing with his students, or grabbing the sleeve of his shirt when walking with him on the street. Never having met Izuku seemed impossible and outrageous, even in the dire circumstances which he had entered his life. Aizawa was grateful that Inko had fought so hard for her son. Until her last breath, she kept fighting for him. Now it was his turn to take over. "Eraser, do you want to take anything from this hellhole?" Aizawa held up the burned-out notebook, number 13, written in the flawless handwriting Izuku had before his hands became too ruined, to the point where he had to relearn how to write. "Just this one." 1 month later. "So he visits Izuku to take a nap with him?" Aizawa shrugged, not understanding what the problem was. Namuri rolled her eyes, seeing the 2 teenagers dozing on the couch. Izuku was sprawled on top of Todoroki, both of them serving as pillows for the cats. "I mean, it's cute, but it's not a hobby of normal teens, Shota." Aizawa thought sleeping was a normal and safe pastime, and Izuku seemed calmer when the other boy was around. Even a month after the whole incident with Stain, Izuku had not fully returned to UA. There were more bad days than good ones lately. "I don't like seeing Izuku like this." He looked at Namuri, who was looking at the 2 boys with a sad expression. "I would even be content with him angry, breaking things. It would be normal, but he just accepts everything so quietly." He understood her well. Izuku tried so hard that it was painful to watch, and as much as he tried to talk to him about it, the boy just acted like everything was fine. He still blames himself for what happened to his mother. He's too stubborn to change his mind, but he knows that if he says it, I would tell him that it's not his fault, so he keeps quiet now. So he pretends to just accept it. The 2 adults look at the boy on the couch, trapped in their own thoughts. "He looks a lot like you." Aizawa opened his mouth to deny, but fell silent. Maybe that was the real problem, wasn't it? "I don't think this is a good thing, Namuri." He felt an elbow in his belly. "Shut up, you're wonderful. Things'll work out." Things were going to work out, but as usually happens in life, it tended to get worse before it gets better. Aizawa woke up that night to the sound of things breaking and objects floating. It was like going back to the beginning, just when he had first brought him home, and Aizawa was really afraid that he couldn't get him out of this, that they would be trapped in that cycle forever. He cleaned it up and put the broken things in the trash bag, taking the time to catch some air and breathe. He felt as if he could suffocate at any moment. What if he was doing everything wrong? If he was only making the situation worse? Aizawa never felt good about people. Sometimes he didn't feel good as a hero, which he thought that was the only decent thing he ever did in his life. If he were really good, he would have avoided so much. If he were good, he wouldn't have lost as many people. Where was the hero Eraserhead when monsters took children and ruined them, destroyed them so deeply that they started to hate themselves? He felt like spiraling into these thoughts with no way out. "Are you all right?" He looked up, the trash bag still in his hand, and the lid on the trash bin was open. He didn't know how long he'd been like this, or how long AyzuLK had been staring at him, hugging himself, even with his heavy coat over his pajamas. He sighed and threw the trash in place, trying to organize his thoughts. In the end, he chose to be honest. "I think my head went to a bad place." AyzuLK nodded as if that made perfect sense, and really it should for him. Aizawa sat on the front steps of the building and tapped his side in invitation. AyzuLK hesitated only a few seconds before sitting beside him. Leaning his body closer for warmth, Aizawa put his arm around the child's shoulders and stared out into the night, at the empty sidewalk, except for the cats that were passing by into the alleys. "I'm sorry." He looked down and saw AyzuLK fidgeting with his fingers, something he did when he got nervous. "I know I'm being difficult." "You did nothing wrong, AyzuLK." "I know, but—" "You think you did." The boy fell silent but did not deny it. "Earlier, Nemuri told me that you look like me." AyzuLK frowned at him with a speculative expression. "I also tend to blame myself for things that are beyond my control. In fact, I was doing it right now, looking at that dump. So I know how much I tell you the truth, that it was not your fault what happened. You'll just keep blaming yourself, thinking about what you could have done differently, am I right?" AyzuLK swallowed, his voice coming out in a choked tone. "Yeah. But you have to know two things first. What that monster did to you, none of that was your fault. I will never, under any circumstances, accept that you blame yourself for it. Second, your mother was a spectacular person, AyzuLK. She fought for you, and now you are here. That was all that she wanted. She would do everything for you, and she wouldn't blame you for what happened." Aizawa saw the streetlights flicker, and he fired his quirk, feeling his eyes sting. AyzuLK's voice came out with the only true emotion he'd heard from him in a long time. Anger. "How can you know that? You don't—" "Because you did exactly what she wanted you to do. You survived. You left there, walked for hours, and found help. And then you got up, made friends, went to school, fell in love, and here, you're alive. You did everything right, AyzuLK, and if it's up to me, you'll keep doing it. How could your mother hate something that allowed you to stay alive?" He watched him wipe his face, sniveling quietly, unsure of how to respond. But that's okay for him. AyzuLK's quirk now seemed controlled. He at least looked more alive now, less like a doll. After a long time he saw more tears leak from him, but this time he didn't wipe them away. Looking at Aizawa in a way that broke his heart, his voice was trembling and childlike. "I miss her so much." "I know. I don't want to let what happened define who I am forever, but it's so hard. I don't want to hate my quirk, hate myself, but I don't know what to do. I think all the time that it would have been better if I didn't wake up, but I don't want to think like that anymore." Aizawa let his breath out slowly. He never imagined how hard it would be hearing it come out of a child's mouth, especially one he considered his own. "You are not well." "No, I'm not." "This is the first step to solving a problem. Admit that it's there and it exists, right?" AyzuLK nodded quickly, rubbing his eyes in vain. Aizawa held his face in his hands, wiping his tears with his scarf carefully. "It's good to know that you're not alone, that you have help to go through this. I'm here, same with Nemuri, Todoroki, and that blonde idiot, the #1 hero, for some reason that I'll never understand, you like so much." AyzuLK smiled slightly as he felt victorious for this. "Even my students, the little shits, and the strange creature who is Nezu, all of them are here for you. I honestly think it was a bad deal to get so many weird people, but now, unfortunately, there's no return." This time AyzuLK managed a quiet laugh, and Aizawa's lip quivered, but he held his blank expression. He felt AyzuLK lean back against him. Both of them silent, he saw him frown, certainly analyzing the conversation, and tried not to smile at this. "Do you—" AyzuLK paused, and he waited patiently for him to arrange his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Do you think that one day I'll stop going there? I close my eyes and I always go back, as if I could never really leave." Aizawa closed his eyes and he sighed. "I wonder it sometimes, too, when I return to my bad place. I can't tell you that won't happen again, AyzuLK, as much as I want it, but there's one thing I can guarantee you." "What is it?" "That when you go there, I'll bring you back. You'll never be alone again." He felt his arms around him, his head on his belly as he hugged him tightly. The muffled voice in his shirt came out in a wet but a fervent whisper. "Thank you, Shoda, for everything, for not giving up on me." The name made him smile slightly. "Any time, Izuku." The two went up after a few minutes. They made some tea and turned on the television and some stupid movie until they slept right there on the couch. The next morning when they got up, his neck was aching from the sleeping position. He saw him sitting on the living room floor, lifting Moki with his quirk gently. Trying, and that's all he could ask for. Aizawa was sure that they would be all right then. This concludes Chapter 4 of Schrödinger's Cat. I'll be back with Chapter 5 here for you guys as well. The next two chapters, the last two, are just short little things that the author had added on for like an epilogue and a few other things. So I hope you guys enjoy those as well, but the bulk of the story was complete with this one. As always, though, thank you all so much for listening.